Hello, my name is Samuel Baker, and today we will be discussing an economic and historical review and analysis of some of the aspects of space mining and how that fits into a broader view of space development. To clarify my methods, I intend to dispel some inaccurate myths or truisms, illustrate how verified economic laws have applied in the past and how they can be used in a predictive manner in the present, and to hopefully inform and provide for interesting discussion. With that said, let's continue, and firstly attack the biggest myth, or inaccuracy, with the concept of space mining. That is, the idea that mining asteroids, specifically for their precious metals, would collapse Earth's economy, or at least the precious metals market back on Earth. Like many rumors or myths, it does contain many elements of truth, in particular with regards to the laws of supply and demand. Markets can and have been destroyed or crashed by a sudden, violent influx of supply, causing an unraveling in the price and the whole market shortly thereafter. Historically, this happened in 1983 when the international video game market fell by over 90% in revenue in the space of a year due to a vast increase in the supply of video games and a general lack of quality. Mining is very different, though, and for a number of reasons, particularly space mining is different. For one, although great strides are being made in the private industry with regards to spacecraft and the ability to mass produce them, it's unlikely there will be a massive sudden influx of metal from asteroids anytime soon. In fact, the most likely first use of mining in space will be to recover ice for fuel, with precious metals being a side thought or an afterthought. That doesn't mean they aren't a tempting prize, though. After all, with a cheap SpaceX Starship and its many dozens of tons of carrying capacity, why not bring back a few rocks rich in ore? Historically, bringing back gold and precious metals was in fact often the secondary goal of initial exploratory missions to the New World, and this could likely be the case again, but more on that later. Because mining, and especially space mining, has incredibly high costs of entry as a market, it's very unlikely that there will be many firms at all. And that means firms will become price makers. Firms dictate prices and can coordinate to limit supply when there's very few of them, due to the scarcity of competition. But even if precious metals mined from asteroids, ignoring all that, somehow started flooding the market, this isn't necessarily a doomsday situation for those precious metals either. To better understand, I've constructed a comparison based on what happened to another precious metal when its quantity supplied suddenly increased, that being aluminum. Way back in the 1800s, aluminum was actually incredibly difficult to manufacture due to its high reactivity, making refining bauxite ore into clean metal arduous to say the least. In fact, aluminum was at its height far rarer than gold and worth more than twice as much. Napoleon III even had a special set of aluminum cutlery specifically for his most esteemed guests. However, with the 1886 discovery of the Hall-Héroult process, aluminum overnight swapped from an incredibly difficult to an incredibly easy to produce material. And due to the high availability of ore and high usefulness of that metal, it was exploited quickly, leading to a collapse in the price of the metal. This collapse took several years, but that's comparatively speedy. As we all know, aluminum is still around today and is a common material, and the aluminum market is, as a whole, stronger than ever. Why? How could the aluminum market persist with such plummeting prices? Well, it has to do with the usefulness and utility of aluminum. Aluminum is a highly useful material, so even though its status as a luxury material died overnight, its utility skyrocketed. Within a decade, the whole aluminum market had recovered in terms of value, and shortly thereafter was making rapid strides in growth where previously it had been stagnating as an obscure luxury industry. When we apply a similar model of price collapse to the present-day platinum market, platinum being a highly sought-after metal rare on Earth but abundant in space, we can see how an asteroid-based metals market might react to a dramatic drop in price, and how it could survive as an industry, finding new uses with its ease of availability. Before the aluminum market collapsed, it was very similar to how platinum is today. Very little was produced. For platinum to survive as an industry, the amount demanded would actually only need to increase to about 2,300 tons a year, up from the current 200 tons or so, which is roughly, for context, about the mass of selenium metal produced every year, or to put it another way, 1/300th of the copper industry's size. And platinum is highly useful, so having a demand like that isn't impossible. It has applications in catalysts, high temperature uses, against corrosives, it's useful in medical and dental implants, it's a superior replacement to stainless steel for nanomaterials and has uses in batteries and much more. More than half of the platinum market today is already industry related in nature. Platinum is a superior good, economically speaking. Currently, palladium, stainless steel, titanium, and others are being used as inferior substitutes for it. But if its price fell from an increase in supply availability, platinum would be a competitive mineral again, and the demand for it would rise. And if it did so to even a small degree, there would be no market collapse. And as previously established, such a dramatic happening, as in such an enormous increase in the quantity supplied, is unlikely to happen anyway. It's far more likely that the gradual increase in space commerce will lead to a gradual ramping up of extraction, and the low number of firms limits the supply, much like diamond monopolies on Earth currently do. And history and development theory support this idea as well. Historically, precious metals have on occasion become suddenly more available. In 1324, the 10th emperor of Mali, Mansa Musa, went on pilgrimage from West Africa to Mecca in Saudi Arabia. On his journey, he gifted so much gold to the locals of Egypt that he caused a major devaluation in the metal and inflation in the currency. But this was actually intentional, with the purpose of attracting trade and attention to his flourishing empire. Musa's control of the gold demonstrated to his rivals his power, and he personally ended the recession by taking the gold back. Likewise, it's unlikely that those firms in the future in control of a vast amount of mined wealth from space would intentionally allow for their metal to become devalued. Another example is the mining of silver and gold that Spain undertook in their colonies in the 1500s and 1600s, which, contrary to myth, did not collapse their economy, as the gold was controlled mostly by monopoly. In fact, it was the massive wealth of Spain encouraging them to consume and simply buy goods rather than develop their own domestic production that eventually led to their collapse when the gold finally dried up. In fact, the age of exploration makes a very compelling analogy for the space industry as a whole. Humans are no strangers to long, arduous journeys to new sources of wealth, and space is no different. Its hazards and prices are higher, but from the lens of history, not exponentially so. And with the mass production of spacecraft like the SpaceX Starship, the price for getting to space falls significantly, and it's getting easier and cheaper all the time. It took many decades for the New World to be developed for extractive purposes. In fact, the first major private enterprise in the New World took until 1527 to develop, 35 years post-Columbus. And it was cod fishing and beavering, industries much easier to perform without the heavy infrastructure mining requires. Mining in the Americas didn't really begin until the very late 16th century, after permanent settlement was already established. It could be the same for mining in space. Now, it isn't accurate to say that history repeats itself, but in the words of Mark Twain, it often rhymes. What's true then is true today, that we live in an economy driven by profit seekers and ruled by the same laws of supply and demand. And we haven't lost any of our sense of adventure or want for knowledge either. The same forces that pushed our ancestors over distant hills and across the oceans are still pushing us today towards the stars. It's wise to recognize the course of history and learn from it. And there are many things to learn from the age of exploration. For instance, that when commerce and national interests take precedent, oftentimes scientific and cultural needs are put long aside. In the colonization of the New World, countless species were made extinct and many others nearly exterminated. Huge swathes of land were effectively destroyed, and enormous amounts of historical, ecological, and even geologic information were lost in the rapid commercial exploitation of the New World. And today, there is a similar rapid expansion that is occurring with space. Already today, the sky is becoming blotted with satellites, and more to the point, national interests like the Chinese government are already stating their aims to effectively own portions of the lunar surface. And companies like SpaceX intend to literally colonize Mars. If we look to history, it's clear that dominion over space is coming. The economics supports this, and the technology exists. It's really only a matter of time. If the interests of science and human knowledge are going to be preserved through this process, scientists and activists should take an active role now and clear out a space for their priorities under the umbrella of the growing private and strategic domination, rather than being forced to play a distant second fiddle as they did in the New World. We live in a unique time, at another precipice of human exploration, exploitation, and expansion into a new territory, and we shouldn't forget the lessons of history. Markets and people haven't much changed their behaviors through time. This concludes my presentation. I hope you found some of the information to be fascinating or helpful in expanding your knowledge base. There was a lot of information and metrics I had to skip over or omit for this format, and this is part of a wider research project I'm currently working on at UCF. If you've particularly enjoyed or had any interesting ideas or questions regarding any of this, please feel free to contact me or ask for the slides. I'm more than happy to share and learn, and I really appreciate any feedback. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you again for your time.